Hello, everyone. Let's take a look at the definition of a couple of terms that honestly you wouldn't think go together, right? These are not opposites of one another. However, they are in computing terms. So let's take a look at creativity. That's the ability to produce or use original and unusual ideas to create a solution. Creativity. Too many rules might deaden creativity. It might stunt its growth. Definition of a commodity, well, that's anything that can be bought and sold. And as a matter of fact, here is an example of commodity such as grains are a commodity. Now, in technology, they have often said, and a lot of this comes from the business side of things, that PCs became a commodity and that all technology eventually becomes a commodity. What they mean by that is not really the definition of a commodity. What they mean by that is it becomes so prevalent within society, within a certain use set, say in business, PCs became just a commodity as something that you had to have, right? That's really what they mean in technology terms when they say, oh, the computer has become a commodity. If they say, oh, the smartphone has become a commodity, they mean that for this set use, whether that's business or home use or all of your life, everything in your life, that whatever that technology is has been reduced to I need to have it. And when that gets reduced to I need to have it, then they often say that it becomes much less creative. And so let's take a look at a couple of things here. This is just right off of the old computer.net website, which I think is great. The reason why is they don't fill you full of crap. Some of the stuff on other historical sites, they'll throw in their ideas of things instead of just, hey, this was this computer, this is what it provided, this is what it looks like, this is what you could do with it, right? That's what we see here. And so they show you, right, we'll go all the way back to this 1970, the data point 2200, which was the first real PC, as it would be said, that came out in 1970, although nothing really happened with it. And there it was. We can look at the IBM 5100. That was the $20,000 model. That, you know, it was a PC, but it was definitely not in the price range of what people would buy. And then you go on up through, we keep going, we keep going. Lots of things happened in 83. Look at all those that are released in 83. Tons of, and then 84 is a lot. 85, not as much. And it seems to start to slow down. And then we get to, hey, wait a minute. Where's the rest of them? Right at that point, you can say, okay, the PC won, the IBM PC won, and now it's a commodity. Now, something we usually see with that, so let's jump over to one of my other tabs here, is this kind of event where it cheap, right? Becomes cheaper. This is a little off, right? This says you could get a computer for $80. You don't want that computer. You can't compare that computer for $80 to this $1,100 one back in 1997. You just can't do it. But you could get a computer for that low, right? So it's really not that low. Somebody really exaggerated that out. But definitely, right, it came down in price from $1,200. That was the standard system, was $1,200 and up. So you pay at the base $1,200 to the base being basically $80. And that's a big difference. When that price starts to drop down, then it makes it able for a lot more people to buy something, and then it becomes much more of a commodity. Now let's take a look at inflation here. So I've got an inflation calculator pulled up, and in 1984, my family spent about $450 for a computer with a monitor and a disk drive. And in today's money, that would cost $1,329. So definitely the price in computers has dropped. So if we look at the same value, right, what I'm getting then for $450 and what would it equal now? $1,329, right? So it definitely has dropped over time, but there is that correlation. There is a specific correlation between something becoming cheaper. Now, something happened in the 90s that was really kind of a race to the bottom. So when we look at this, what started to happen is the Dell came in, and this is a business concept that basically any business wants to become a monopoly, because then once they become a monopoly, they can charge whatever they want for that service. All businesses want to become a monopoly. So Microsoft pushed that and really did become a monopoly by the time you hit the late 90s. By the time this happens, by the time 1997 happens, Microsoft is a monopoly. There's nobody else really buying any other systems other than Microsoft. And yeah, you could say Apple exists and Unix exists, and hey, Linux is coming out, right? That came out in 96. But that's a super small percentage of what people are buying. Pretty much everybody's buying Windows. So Dell does something. Dell comes out and Dell says, let's actually see if we can pull up a little history of Dell here. I will pause this for a minute so I can pull that up. All right, so here's a little information about Michael Dell. And so in 1980, he purchased his first computer, takes it apart, and then he wants to sell. I wanted to beat IBM, sells upgraded PCs out of his UT dorm room, which is true, University of Texas dorm room. And then he registers it. And then in 1986, 12 megahertz, 286, 285, 286 base system, 30 back money guarantee. And so this is when Dell starts to build lots of computers. At the time, you also had companies like Gateway, and I'm going to use them as an example because they did something different and are dead now. So let's look at timeline of Gateway computers. So remember, we're talking about a monopoly. Let's see if we can find anything. We don't. We got a few. Definitely got a few computer history timelines, but nothing specifically to Gateway. Well, Gateway was huge. Gateway was a really, really big company. And so let's just talk about what happens between the two and why Dell's here and Gateway isn't. So lots of people will note, you go over to Apple's site and there's a certain set prices. And so just to throw it out there to begin with, yeah, as you know, there's certain things I really hate that Apple does. They always charge a ton of money for extra storage and extra RAM. That's what they do. But something that they do have right is, what should the base be for a computer? So when you try to become a monopoly, what you're trying to do is subsidize what it really costs to build the equipment with something else, so that you'll just get more and more of a monopoly. This happens in gaming. Most people that are gamers know this, that it costs more in the initial startup of a new Xbox or PlayStation. That costs more than what they're going to sell it for. And they're going to make up the price on licensing of basically saying, you can program for us. Basically, that's where they're going to make up the money. Then as it moves along, you get 3 or 4 years into that particular model. Now you're making money off the model because, right, the technology prices have come down and that stuff is not as new and as fancy as it once was. So that's the concept. So Dell starts to do this really predatory pricing, and that becomes around 1990. So they begin to basically say, let's drive this price to the bottom. How can we put others out of business, right? So you had Compaq, HP, North Star, geez, there's a ton of them. The Gateway was a huge one. The Micron computers. There was tons of PC manufacturers. And basically, this is what you had. Base model, $1,200. That was a base model. And then it went up from there. That included 3 years of service agreement. So you just got your 3 years built in. And all the quality hardware, right? If you're going to say, hey, this is going to last 3 years, then you better put in quality stuff. Otherwise, people are going to be calling you in 2 years, right? So power supply, everything's going to last longer than 3 years. And then if you want other stuff on top of that, it would go from about $1,200 to $2,500. You could go more expensive than that. But really, that was the price range, $1,200 to $2,500. And then Dell starts to undercut this, right? So we'll sell it for $1,000, even though they can't make a profit off of that, right? And they can't cover their costs. Then Let's sell it for 700. Let's sell it for 400. So within about 8 to 10 years, you go from the base being 1,200 down to $400. Now, of course, lots of things are happening in between this time, which means that $1,200 computer is a different computer than the $400 one, which is what I try to teach people, right? You cannot go out and go and say, oh, that's got the same processor and that's got the same amount of RAM in it and the same amount of storage in it, and it's $400 less. So I'm buying that one. You cannot do that because you're not dealing with quality, right? That's the difference. And so usually in any IT situation, like where they're running an IT shop, they're never going to buy the $400 or $700 models, because those are going to be too problematic. They're going to buy something more expensive because it's got the better hardware in it. So really what's happening is a deception, right? What Dell Computers is doing is saying, we're going to drive out our competitors so that we'll have more of the market. And let's see how long we can do that. And then once we hit that point, we'll let that price catch up to us. And then we won't have as much competition, which is exactly what happens. When I mention Gateway, right? When I say, oh, what happened with Gateway here? Gateway is gone. They disappeared. They bought out different things, blah, 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 blah. But when you bought a Gateway machine, the thing was, rock solid. It was excellent. It was good. Micron was the same way. When I worked in the business, we only bought Microns. And when I was working, that's when this started to happen. And people are like, well, you could go out and get a computer now for $800. So why don't you do that? You're spending the $1,200 on this. And it's like, there's a certain cost to making this stuff. And the business that sells it needs to make money in order to keep the quality. But the problem is that people didn't understand that. And so they became part of the fraudulent situation that happened. Right, we kept with Micron as long as Micron was there. They were like a top-end gateway, honestly, and we never had a problem. Right, they'd put a Micron in, and then 4 years later, you take it out of service, never having had to touch it at all. But the people and the powers that be, right, the people you answer to are like, well, you can get that same system for 800, and it's like, can you though? Can you really do that? Well, according to right, they don't understand the technology, they don't understand the quality. And so Micron goes out of business, Gateway goes out of business, Compaq and HP had to merge in order to save their business, and Compaq used to be the hugest one out there. And of course, now we're back to understanding, right? You can go and get a $400 notebook, you can go and get a $400 PC, but within 2 months or 3 months, you're not going to like it, right? If you haven't experienced it, go ahead, do it, see what happens. There's a big difference. And of course, now we see that most systems now are notebooks. That's the largest number of systems that are sold are notebooks. And you know that if I buy a $400 notebook, that's not like the $1,200 one, right? Right here, I had to buy $700 notebooks, and I tried to get the best I possibly could for $700. But the screens are really crappy on it, so bad that a lot of students would rather plug in an external monitor because that's so dim. If I had bought the ones that were 1,000, then it wouldn't be there. Heaven forsakes, if I bought the $1,200 one, I would have, the thing would almost be twice as fast. And so what does this have to do? Well, as the computer became a commodity, people began to look at it like a bag of flour. Well, I just buy the flour I get, and I get the cheapest one I can because it's all the same. In their minds, what they're basically saying is, does it have Windows? Yes. All right. Does it have Word and Excel? Yes. Can I get on the internet? Yes. All right. That's the same as the $1,200 model. No. Oh, yeah, it is. Right. Because it's a commodity. The mindset is I need computers to do work. I'm not really looking at the quality. And so that's where Microsoft, that's where Apple got it right. Apple got it right in the point of being able to say, look, here is our base machine, which now is like $700, $800, right? But we're not going below that. We're not selling the low end. We have no low end. We want a higher quality so we get less phone calls and people return to us because they bought even an $800 one, never had trouble with it. So now they're going to come back and buy another one. That's good business. That's the way business works. It works with cars. It works with everything. And basically, for a while, Dell ran that to the bottom. And of course, now Dell has a lot of trouble. Dell has trouble with the fact that they're not seen as quality. They're not seen as somebody who's going to give you something good. So even if you buy a $1,200 one, why didn't you buy an Apple product instead? Because the Dell is not quality. That's the legacy that they end up with, and they've had a hard time pulling out of that. HP barely survived that situation, and now again, of course, people realize there's a difference in the quality when you buy that, and all gamers tend to understand that, right? There's components that you want that are going to withstand the pressure of playing the game. You're not buying a commodity device. You're buying something that's going to function and do what you want it to do over and over and over again. And so the negativity of something becoming a commodity is that it's not quality. The same thing happens with phones, right? It's like all sorts of people. I brought a brand new phone. I got a brand new phone. It's $300 with a bunch of old components in it, right? And older RAM. I remember reading an article because, the iPad came out and really people are like, oh, those Apples, man, they charge too much for their products. They charge too much. And it's like, they do, right? RAM and storage, they definitely charge too much for that. But when you talk about everything else, you're really talking about a quality. I've got an Apple iPad Air. Geez, how old is that thing now? The thing still works. The battery's still good in it. I don't even know how the battery made it that long, because that's really something that you have a lot less control over as a manufacturer. But there it is. Keeps working. Slow as all get out, but the hardware is just fine. Keeps functioning. And so there's trying to keep that quality over making it a commodity. And that's exactly what happened with tablets. Again, I read an article that back when I bought that was like, oh, you can get this Samsung tablet and it's $300 less. And it's like, yeah, I bet you won't be talking about how crappy the RAM is in it when it's all burnt out and not working anymore, which is exactly what happened, right? Within 2 years, they have massive returns on them because they don't function anymore. There is that baseline of this is what you have to pay in order to make something good. And that does drop as you go through technology, all through years of technology, but it doesn't drop like this that you see on the screen. And a lot of business people will bring in this aspect and say, see, look at that. And it's like, no, really, this $1,200 baseline has moved down to around $800, but it did not move down to $80. These are not the same systems, but in business, they'll try to make it sound that way, right? So when you look at phones, when you look at tablets, when you look at any computing device, you're dealing with that part of it. Now, the biggest reason I show you all this is that you're going to be going out and working someday in departments that either will take this attitude, we got to buy as many for as cheap as possible, or they'll say, no, there's this baseline, otherwise we're creating more problems for ourselves. And there are a lot more people within technology have moved to that part of it, which there's a baseline. Sorry, we're not going to buy all the Chromebooks because half of them will be dead in 2 years. And they won't, the hinge on the screen will just fall over. There'll be all sorts of little crap like that because we bought the cheapest thing that we possibly could instead of something that made sense. And you're going to have to deal with people that are in business on the other side, and they don't look at it that way. They look at it like, hey, it runs Google Docs and it's $400 less. So get it, right? And then they kind of have to learn with broken. Then you kind of have to tell them what's broken because of these reasons, until finally they start to see what's going on. But that is how these compare, creativity and commodity. At the beginning of the internets, of the PC, wow, tons of creativity, tons of ways to do things. Then once something's standardized, nope, we don't got no more. There's not tons of ways to do things. There's only one way to do things, and now it's a commodity. That's how those two link together. Creativity within technology comes at a cost of something having a commodity. So if we want prices to be lower on phones, they have to become more of a commodity than seeing the creativity that happens. And you might right now say, well, that's not even the case, right? They just upgrade the camera. They just upgrade. It's like, what do you expect them to do? What are you expecting out of this? I want VR right now. It's like there is actually quite a bit of creativity that's happening within the mobile phone market that people don't consider creativity. Why? Because they just use the commodity portion. They just use, I get on the internet with it, and that's about it. So that's how those two compare. If you got any questions on it, let me know. Thanks for watching.